Spoiler alert! The film Fury is set in April 1945, during the final days of World War II in Europe. The story centers on Staff Sergeant Doane War Daddy Collier, played by Brad Pitt, an M4 Sherman tank commander nicknamed Fury. The film depicts the dangerous mission of the Fury tank crew behind German enemy lines. They face various challenges, ranging from fierce battles against outnumbered but determined Nazi troops, to dealing with psychological trauma from the atrocities of war. The gray sky blankets the vast fields. Through the thin mist, a white horse walks slowly across the silent battlefield. Doane War Daddy Collier, the American tank commander, steps down slowly, silent. With a cold, unflinching stare, he stabs the German soldier with a knife. One swift motion, no words. The Sherman tank named Fury rumbles forward, its paint worn, its body scarred by war. After the grim opening scene, the story shifts to a military base in the heart of Germany. Mud, smoke, and the stench of diesel blend into one. This isn't a headquarters, it's a walking front line. The base looks more like a giant mud pit than a safe zone. Military tents lean crookedly on soggy ground. Supply trucks rumble through the ruins. In the distance, artillery fire still echoes. This place isn't for rest. It's just a brief pause between deaths. Fury has returned from battle, dragging behind not only mud, but loss. They lower the body of one of their own, another soul claimed by the war, and now they need a replacement. From the central command, a young, skinny soldier is dropped off. Fresh, raw, untouched by the filth of war. His uniform is still clean. His boots have never met mud. His name, Norman Ellison, a young private with a face too soft for battle, whose hands are made more for typing reports than pulling a trigger. Norman is greeted with skepticism by the three other members of Fury. Boyd, Bible Swan, the calm and religious main gunner. He always carries a Bible, but has no hesitation when it comes to killing. Trini Gordo Garcia, a sharp-handed driver with Latin blood and a sarcastic mouth. Grady Coon-Ass Travis, the brutal and sarcastic loader, a man who prefers fighting over talking. His transfer orders come straight from headquarters. He is assigned as the assistant gunner on a Sherman tank. What he doesn't know is he's replacing a corpse, not a promotion. The previous gunner was blown apart inside that tank. The tank behind him isn't just a machine, it's a moving coffin of steel, pockmarked with bullet scars, bearing a hand-painted name on the gun barrel. Fury. Norman felt shocked and unprepared for his new assignment, but like it or not, he had to be ready for whatever might come next. Besides, a German soldier in an SS uniform was escorted by two men toward the holding area. Without saying a word, War Daddy started to give him punches. Bible rushed in, holding him back. Before starting his duties, Grady taught Norman a few important things about the job. Meanwhile, Doane received a mission to rescue a company of American soldiers who were trapped by a German tank on the battlefield. Doane and several other tank commanders were assigned to head to the location. The mission began. The tanks started to move. Iron tracks tore through the ground, rolling over muddy roads toward enemy territory. German civilians walked away from the battlefield, fleeing the chaos. Norman sat awkwardly inside Fury for the first time. Bible was in the gunner's seat, Gordo at the driver's controls, and Doane War Daddy Collier sat in the command seat, silent, focused, leading the convoy. Doane instructed Norman not to hesitate. If you see anything suspicious, shoot it. However, Norman wasn't mentally ready for Doane's order. He saw someone suspicious, but hesitated to pull the trigger from the assistant gunner's seat. Someone stood up, holding something. A bottle. "Molotov," Doane shouted, but Norman froze. In an instant, the Molotov cocktail was thrown, striking the back tank. After arriving in the captured town, WWII Collier stepped down from Fury. He walked past a crowd of exhausted and wounded soldiers, and several prisoners of war, heading toward the command post. A field commander approached and pointed to an area marked on the open map spread across the table. "Here," he said briefly. "Charlie Company is pinned down in a small valley about 2 miles to the east. They were ambushed by a Panther tank. We've lost direct communication with them for the past 2 hours. And we can't send in air support. The weather's too bad." Doan then turned to brief the other tank commanders, giving instructions about the location and their strategy for the mission ahead. They were no longer attackers. This time, they were rescuers. Not long after, they reached the rim of the valley. All Sherman tanks rolled down first, the Shermans crawling forward with a line of Allied infantry marching right behind them. Several soldiers were still sprawled across the open field, pinned by enemy fire from unseen positions, until the advancing Shermans gave them cover to crawl to safety behind the tanks. The Panther fired first. A single round tore up the ground beside Fury, the blast rocking the crew inside. Doan stayed calm. "Don't panic. Close the distance. Fire only when I say." Doan gave the order instantly. "Wing formation, left, middle, and right. We're flanking it." Trini drove Fury down the valley. With sharp instincts and quick reflexes, he dodged the Panther's incoming fire. One German tank was down. The crew of Fury was disappointed because Norman didn't fire a single shot. Norman watched them in silence. That was the face of war. Not victory, but survival. The remaining German soldiers, whether still alive or already dead, were shot again. That's war. Anger, vengeance, and caution blur into one ambiguous. Doan realized Norman's mind wasn't ready, his spirit too soft for the brutal reality of war. Doan knew he had to do something, anything, to help Norman survive. Then, a German soldier was captured alive. Doan ordered Norman to step forward. With a firm, almost commanding tone, he told him to carve a hole into the prisoner's back. Not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. Doan wanted every one of his crew to survive, and to protect each other when it counted most. The rest of the Fury crew watched from a distance. They said nothing. They knew this moment was harsh, but necessary. War isn't just about surviving. It's about losing pieces of yourself one bullet at a time. Out here, the first lesson isn't how to shoot. It's how to kill. And Norman just passed. After his initiation, the rest of the crew celebrated. They tried to comfort Norman in their own way. From that moment on, Norman was no longer just a newcomer. He was accepted as one of Fury's crew, and personally, Doan gave respect to Norman because of his kinds. Allied tanks carrying soldiers moved in formation across a wide open field. They were headed toward another small town, one more target to capture. That was the mission of Fury and the other tanks, to wipe out the Nazi forces town by town. And now they had arrived at another quiet village. As Fury and the other Allied tanks rolled into the small town, they were met with sporadic gunfire from the remaining German forces. Collapsed buildings and narrow streets turned into deadly corridors. Machine guns blazed from upper windows, hunting every step forward. Doan quickly gave the order, take out the high ground, clear the corners. Bullets tore through walls. Dust and rubble filled the air. Sherman tanks fired back, blasting every shadow of the enemy they could find. Infantry took cover behind the vehicles, cautiously advancing through narrow alleys. The battle was swift, violent, and unforgiving, until finally the town fell silent again. But that silence wasn't victory. It was only a pause. The war was far from over. After the battle in the small town had settled, Fury came to a stop on a narrow street lined with half-ruined buildings. Smoke still rose from several points. The bodies of German soldiers lay scattered, and the scent of gunpowder and blood lingered in the air. Amid the chaos, Doan noticed something from an upstairs window. A subtle movement, a curtain shifting, They entered the old building, climbing a creaking wooden staircase. Inside one of the apartments, they found a Sherman woman and another young one hiding under bed, but unfortunately she found by Doan. She is Emma, the cousin. Both were frightened. Doan didn't show any threat. He was calm, respectful. Doan told Norman to sit down and lower his weapon. Then he asked Emma to stand and come closer to him. Doan spoke gently to Emma. He offered her canned food, even a rare hard-boiled egg. Emma accepted it with trembling hands, and Doan asked her to cook it in the kitchen. Eventually, Emma and her aunt began preparing the food, feeling safe enough to accept the presence of Doan and Norman. And when Norman started playing the piano, Emma, nervous but brave enough, joined him, softly singing by his side. Doan watched closely. He knew this moment was precious, because there might never be another one like it. His heart was moved to let Emma and Norman be alone together in another room. Norman and Emma were still young and still alive. War rarely gave young people many chances to feel the joys of life. Though Emma's aunt was a bit worried about the situation, behind the closed door, Emma and Norman were both shy. Norman wasn't like most men. He waited for Emma to be ready, so that whatever would happen between them would be out of mutual willingness, not force. "It's a good one, you boy, Norm." After everything happened, Norman stepped out of the room with a wide smile and a bright face. He sat neatly beside Doan, like a kitten that had just been fed fresh fish. But the peace didn't last long. Suddenly, the sound of boots stomping up the stairs broke the silence. Grady, Gordo, and Bible barged in without knocking. "What are you hiding in here?" Grady said, sniffing the scent of eggs. They sat roughly at the dining table, throwing out crude jokes. The atmosphere turned tense. Norman looked upset. Emma was frightened. Doan put a stop to it. "Enough. Show some respect for this place." Grady fell silent. The others followed. In the awkward atmosphere, the food was finally served. They all ended up eating, though the dining situation was far from comfortable. Grady, who was drunk, tried to touch Emma, but Doan stepped in to protect her. He knew Norman's feelings for the girl were genuine, and he wasn't about to let Grady, or anyone else, ruin that small moment of happiness. His situation at the dining table didn't get any better. Grady kept rambling, and Gordo and Bible seemed to back him up. From their perspective, Doan should have let Grady have what he wanted for the sake of team harmony. But Doan still refused to let it happen. His leadership was on the line, choosing between protecting his new crew member or siding with the comrades who had been with him through everything. Yet with strength and wisdom, Doan managed to diffuse their words calmly, with authority and grace, without losing a single ounce of respect from the Fury crew. Fortunately, they were soon called out to carry out their next mission.
The old man wants you.
How come?
Knock the next to John the next.
Mary, hurry up.
Here.
A reconnaissance aircraft reported that enemy troops are gathering in the west. The battalion wants Fury and the other tank crews to hold a key crossroads. Unfortunately, the recon plane was shot down before it could gather more intel. No confirmation on enemy numbers, or whether they have tanks or artillery. There are mechanics and medics stationed along the route the enemy is expected to take. If they break through the crossroads, they'll destroy the supply convoys, and the entire division could be wiped out. A captain-level officer pointed to a red mark on the map. You and your unit will lead the way. The objective is simple: secure and hold this crossroads. No matter what happens, don't let anyone get through. Moments before they were set to depart, an air raid struck their resting location. Tragically, one of the ballistic missiles hit the very building where Emma and her aunt were staying. The blast leveled the structure. He ran hysterically toward the ruins of Emma's building. But there was nothing they could do. This was war. No time to grieve. The battle pressed on. The enemy kept moving. The crew had to stay on mission. With heavy hearts and deep wounds, Norman and the others left the place behind. A thin mist blanketed the open field as 4 Sherman tanks moved in formation. And boom! One of them hit by a legendary German Panther unit tanks known to be stronger, faster, and armored thicker than anything the Allies possessed. The fierce predator emerged from its lair, launching a direct assault on the 3 tanks. Under War Daddy's command, they did not flinch. They advanced head-on to confront it. The first blast came from the Panther. A precise shot struck the lead tank on the right flank. The second explosion followed. The second tank erupted in flames in the middle of the open field. Only Fury remained. The Panther slowly turned its barrel, now aiming directly at Fury. Doan stayed calm. Let's finish this. With a death-defying courage, Fury charged alone. 1 tank against 1 tank. David versus Goliath. Fury managed to find the Panther's weak spot through a daring maneuver. With precision and nerve, they struck penetrating the Panther's armor. The German tank shuddered, then burst into flames. Its crew eliminated. Doan sat silently in his seat. Norman stared out through the narrow slit of the tank. Grady checked the ammunition. Bible bowed his head, silently praying. Gordo inspected Fury's engine, which was starting to sputter. They all knew they were still alive. Fury finally arrived at the crossroads, a vital point they were ordered to hold. Then, boom, a landmine. Its steel track was blown apart. They had to fix it fast. Grady and Norman scanned the surroundings. In that moment, Grady apologized for his hard before, something rarely done by a man like Grady. But Norman's kind heart broke through his walls. Doan then instructed Norman to move ahead and keep watch, to be the first to spot any incoming enemies. Norman hid beneath the bush, resting just as Doan had instructed. He knew Doan pitied him. Even in the chaos, Doan had given him water, food, something to hold on to. A fragment of kindness in a world gone mad. But peace never lasts in war. From his hiding spot, Norman suddenly caught sight of movement, a formation of Nazi soldiers. He sprinted back toward the tank. He had to warn them. Norman reported that the enemy force numbered in the hundreds. The rest of the crew hurried to prepare an escape. They didn't grasp the consequences if the Nazi troops pushed through this crossroads. Doan thought it over and decided he had to stay inside the tank and fight. The others argued against the idea, so Doan told them they were free to go. Bible saw the sincerity in Doan's eyes. Yet Norman was the first to climb back into Fury to stand beside him. Bible followed, then Gordo, and finally Grady, none of them willing to miss the fight or leave Doan to face it alone. They immediately began preparing a strategy, setting things up so the enemy would underestimate the tank and not realize the danger it posed. Ammunition and explosives were prepared. They had to ration everything carefully, knowing that their limited supplies were no match for the overwhelming number of enemies. They were fully aware of the worst-case scenario. They spoke about the Word of God, listening to Bible's sermon as they drank together. Doan, Grady, Gordo, Norman, and Bible shared the moment, each reflecting that this, despite everything, was the best job they had ever had in their lives. The moment of waiting for an enemy they knew they couldn't possibly defeat was spent sharing stories and feelings they'd carried throughout their time fighting together. Even Grady managed to come up with a middle name for Norman, the Machine. They kept joking, wrapping their fear and anxiety in layers of forced joy and loud laughter. Not long after, the storm came. The soldiers were not particularly alert. Many assumed the tank had already been destroyed and abandoned. Then the assault began. The SS troops attacked from all directions, unleashing a hail of gunfire from a distance. Fury responded. The thunderous blast of the 76mm cannon roared, spitting fire. Bodies flew. The earth was torn apart. The night lit up by flashes of fire and sprays of blood, until eventually their internal ammunition ran low. They had no choice. They had to get out and reload. The Nazi assault didn't stop. Their numbers seemed endless, wave after wave storming fury. But the crew inside the tank were just as relentless, firing back with precision, determined to take down as many as they could. Doan was the first to get wounded, and then Bible tended to him. In that moment, Bible expressed that he felt honored to have fought alongside Fury. He never regretted doing everything with them. Fury was God's beauty in his life. After the intense firefight, silence fell, as if the German soldiers had all been wiped out. They fired an anti-tank rocket launcher weapon. Grady was struck by the powerful blast, so suddenly that he didn't even have time to say a word. Amidst the siege of hundreds of enemies, they stood within the ruins and chose to stay, because they were no longer just soldiers. They were the final shield. When their ammunition finally ran out inside the tank, they began to climb out, facing the enemy with bare chests and open hearts, fighting to the last breath. Doan took control of the mounted assault rifle on top of the tank, cutting down wave after wave of enemies. Gordon threw the last of the grenades, but tragically, his body was struck by enemy fire. The grenade its pin already pulled fell back inside the tank. In a final act of bravery, he wrapped his arms around it, shielding the others from the blast. He exploded with it, so his brothers wouldn't have to. Bible climbed out of the tank, nearly killed in the open. But Norman pulled him to safety just in time. As they tried to climb back inside, a bullet found its mark. It struck Bible in the head. Doan was also targeted by a sniper. The bullet hit him hard. His body jerked back. The commander finally began to fall, not just from the sniper's bullet, but from the crushing weight of watching his brothers fall, one by one, before him. With the last of his strength, he dragged himself back into Fury's cabin. Inside, only Norman remained. Norman admitted he was scared, and Doan said he was too. Norman wanted to surrender, but Doan forbade it, warning that the enemy would torture them and give them a cruel death. Doan told Norman to get down into the tank's lower hatch to save himself. Just moments before 2 grenades were thrown into the cabin, he crawled into Fury's lower protection chamber, pulled in sacks and scrap metal, hiding among the wreckage. Above, Nazi soldiers surrounded the tank. They didn't know there was still one soul alive inside. They lit flares, illuminating every corner of Fury, then left no movement. They thought everyone was dead. Norman remained silent. The scene where a Nazi soldier shines a flashlight under the tank while Norman is hiding has sparked much speculation. It's an ambiguous moment, but to us, it represents a small miracle amidst the chaos. Norman survives, not because of strength or experience, but because he stayed still, endured, and had a little bit of luck.